So it's another week in the February fantasy stories. It's time to talk a little sword and sorcery. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be talking about week 2 of February fantasy stories. We're going to be talking about the sub-theme selected for this week, which was sword and sorcery. This is a great project that has been created by the Bookish Bryants, so if you haven't actually checked out their channel, head on over there and check it out. They do a really good job, and there are some great other hosts doing what I'm doing and reading fantasy fiction for the month of February, and the Bookish Bryants will be compiling all the videos there for everyone to watch, so it really is a great project. Now, I originally chose Conan the Conqueror for my pick for this week's theme, and I had every intention of reading that, but it turned out to be a really crazy week. I was very time poor. I got to the weekend and thought, well, what the hell am I going to read? I'm not going to get a video review of Conan the Conqueror out in time. So I decided to buy online for $1 on Amazon a copy of the Complete Chronicles of Conan to choose some stories out of that to read, and I certainly wasn't disappointed with my picks. I actually read 3 stories. It was the best I can do, being a bit time poor this week, but I did it, and I weren't disappointed. I think I've chosen 3 really good stories. Now, I can't say they're the best or whatnot, because I can't compare it against anything, because these 3 stories is my first go at reading Conan fiction. So I've never read him before, and certainly not disappointed with Robert E. Howard's work. So the first story I chose was The Phoenix on the Sword, which was published way back in 1932. Now, it was published way back then, and the story hasn't really dated, in my opinion. I mean, the language that Robert E. Howard uses stands the test of time even to today. So this particular story takes place in a time where Conan has finally seized his own kingdom of Aquilonia. I hope I pronounced that right. Now, he seized the kingdom by force, and he actually strangled the previous king on his own throne. You can't get more brutal than that, can you? So Conan has put together a close-knit court in his kingdom, but there's a disgruntled character called Escalante. Now, he was a former Count of Thun, and through devious plotting, he puts together a team of assassins to storm the kingdom and make an assassination attempt on Conan's life. What's interesting here is while this is all happening and being planned and hatched out, Conan, while he sleeps, he has a dream where he visits a long-dead sorcerer who's been dead for 1500 years called Epimetheus. And what happens in the dream is the sorcerer carves the outline of a phoenix in Conan's sword. And when he wakes up, the assassins storm his chambers and attempt to kill him. A giant called Grommel is killed with a single blow of Conan's now enchanted blade, but the sword breaks on the giant's head. So what happens now is he finds he's greatly outnumbered. The assassins storm his chambers, and Conan takes a few good hits, and he gives it back as well, and eventually he drops them all. But a former wizard who was enslaved by Escalante, now this is where it gets really interesting. So he was enslaved because he lost his powers due to his power ring being stolen, and reduced him to a slave, and he lost all his powers, and he was under Escalante's yoke. Now, he recovers his ring, puts it on, and regains his power. And it's a serpent ring with yellow eyes. It's really cool. And he conjures a monster to kill Conan, but Conan manages to kill the beast with nothing but his broken sword. So even though the sword is broken, he still vanquishes the monster. And there we go. And he prevails on an attempt on his life. He is a tough bastard. He's the movies don't do it justice. The brutality that Conan uses in his fights is just unbelievable. Now, I found the writing very lyrical and very well done for something that was written in the 1930s. Robert E. Howard is very, very gifted with the written word. It's all I can say. The interesting thing was when battles are described, I can't help but get a vibe that wouldn't be surprised if Steven Erikson drew some inspiration from Robert E. Howard, because I got a bit of that vibe. Steven Erikson writes fight scenes in a very similar way, so wouldn't be surprised if anyone knows the answer to that. I'd like to know, but I just found that really interesting. The world building was just awesome, and for something that was written in the 1930s, I really enjoyed it. I didn't find the language too difficult to read. Some of the descriptive passages in the next story that I'll go into in a moment was incredible, yeah, I am enjoying the ride so far. So let's start with the second story I read, which was The Scarlet Citadel. This was written way back in 1933. Now, it's another story that takes place after the events of the Phoenix on the Sword, and so it's also a King Conan story. Now, I'm going to share something with you because the opening descriptive passage of this story absolutely blew me away. Now, if you haven't read Conan before, I'm going to read you this passage, and it's just insanely good, and I'd be surprised if you didn't agree with me. So here we go. Chapter 1. The roar of battle had died away. The shout of victory mingled with the cries of the dying. Like gay-hued leaves after an autumn storm, the fallen littered the plain. The sinking sun shimmered on burnished helmets, gilt-working mail, silver breastplates, broken swords, and the heavy, regal folds of silken standards overthrown in pools of curdling crimson. In silent heaps lay war-horses and their steel-clad riders, flowing manes and blowing plumes, stained alike in the red tide. About them, and among them, like the drift of a storm, were strewn, slashed and trampled bodies in steel caps and leather jerkins, archers and pikemen. Wow. Fantastic opening line. This is, out of the three stories, this is my favourite. It was so well written and just drew me in straight away. It was just incredible. So what actually happens here in the start is Conan's army of 5,000 went up against 30,000 of King Stobonius's knights, and Stobonius is the king of Koth, which is a southern kingdom. Now, only Conan himself survives, so you can picture this. 5,000 warriors all dead at Conan's feet. He's the lone survivor of a brutal attack, and it just goes to show that, as I mentioned previously, that Steven Erikson, I'd be surprised if he didn't get inspiration from Robert E. Howard. It was an incredible descriptive scene, and it goes on a little bit, but I won't read the rest of that. And so what happens is Conan is outnumbered, and and even though he's outnumbered and he's the only one standing, he still says, "Come on, I'll kill you all." And then a lone figure approaches Conan without any fear, and it turns out that this sorcerer called Sorcery approaches Conan with no fear. Conan says, "I'm going to waste you," sort of thing. And what happens is Sorcery, as Conan swings his sword, reaches out his hand and takes hold of his forearm. And what's happened is it's a ring on his finger that has a spike, which has poison from a rare plant on it that paralyzes Conan, and it freezes all his muscles, but he's kept conscious and he knows what's going on. All he can do is just lay on this chariot that gets carried to Sothi's red citadel tower. And so he's taken there as prisoner so that the army can go and storm his kingdom and take it back. Now, what happens beneath the citadel, he gets placed in a dungeon and gets shackled to a wall that he can't break out of. He's bound by pretty strong chains, and the experiences he has in this tunnel, like there's a giant snake, and there is a brutal eunuch who is the resident torturer, who plans on torturing Conan. But what happens is eventually Conan gets out of the dungeon, and he escapes with the help of another sorcerer called Peleus, who has been a prisoner there for a very long time, and he's held in check by this freakish plant that injects its venom into him to erase his former personality so he doesn't remember how to do his magic. Conan rescues him from the plant, and Peleus gets all his amenities back and gets his power back as a wizard, and so together they find a way to escape. Now this is really cool. Conan stuck his sword in the guts of the eunuch, who was the resident torturer, and he's been dead for a few hours, and the cell block is locked behind a bolt from the outside, so Conan and Peleus can't get out. So what Peleus does, using his magic, he reanimates the eunuch, so he zombifies him, and he's essentially becomes the Walking Dead, and Peleus bids him to open the bolt, and the bolt slides back. Conan and Peleus escape, and Peleus releases the eunuch and sends him back to hell, and he just drops back to the stone floor. Absolutely amazing. So on the back of a giant bat, Conan flies back to Aquilonia's capital and takes back the city, and then he vanquishes Tsothi, Amalric and Stavonis in a furious battle at the end. So he takes back his kingdom and kills all those people that crossed him and tried to take his kingdom. So Conan is such a badass. He really is. So that was probably my favourite of the three. Now, the third one I read was a pretty short one. It was only about 10 pages, but this one was called Gods of the North. Now, this is an interesting one. The story starts with Conan being, again, a lone survivor on the battlefield. So all his men have been killed, and he's the last one standing. And what Conan has done, he's advanced north, where it's like our North Pole, so it's obviously cold, and what happens is he gets approached by this ethereal woman, and how Robert E. Howard describes this woman is very detailed. So she's white, she's naked, has flowing red hair, the ruby red lips, the whole box and dice, and Conan becomes enamored by her, and she leads him further north, and because she's captivated him, she's like this spectral ghost that floats across the plains, and Conan decides he has to have her. So she lures him further north, and what she does to him, she calls out to her two brothers, who are two frost giants, and they try and kill Conan, and Conan chops them down, and it shocks this ghostly woman. And so what happens is at that point there's lightning and fire across the sky, like a god is descending upon the icy wastelands, and Conan falls unconscious, and when he comes to, we see him surrounded by his backup army that hadn't been able to make it to the battle until now. So they're trying to rouse Conan, and he's telling them the story, and they're saying no, he's delirious from the cold, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And one of the older warriors said, hang on, there's some truth to his story, because I've seen this entity myself, and apparently this ghostly woman lures warriors from the battlefields north so that she can have her brothers kill the warriors, and that's where the story ends. So it was basically a really short piece, a very descriptive piece, which I really enjoyed. And after reading these three stories, I can honestly say that even though I didn't get time for much reading of Conan this week, I plan on reading a fair bit more of Robert E. Howard's work. He's a great writer, and being written in the 1930s, I thought it would be a little bit difficult to read, but not the case. I found it quite easy, and now that I've got the Complete Chronicles of Conan on my e-reader from Amazon, I will definitely be reading some more stories. So that is it from me on the February Fantasy Stories Week 2. I'm looking forward to Week 3, which is Dark Fantasy. I will be reading Mr. Be Gone by Clive Barker, and I'm excited for that. I'm in for a really good ride with that, and that video will be uploaded next weekend. As to what's coming up on the channel, there are a couple of reviews I'm planning on doing. I'm going to do a review on Dean Koontz's Quicksilver, which was his recent release for January, and I'm also going to be reviewing Mark Dawson's one of Mark Dawson's John Milton books called The Sword of God, which I finished recently as well. So I've got all that coming up. If you have any feedback, please put them below in the comments, and as always, I will respond to those. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and until next time, see you later.